All right, so get ready because we are diving deep today into the world of European tech. If you're wondering what's happening over there right now, we have the perfect guide, the State of European Tech 2024 report. And it is absolutely packed with information. Don't worry though, we're here to break it all down and pull out the most important takeaways. It's like your cheat sheet to really understanding what's going on and what it all means for the future. And joining me today is an expert who's incredible at seeing the big picture and connecting all the dots in this mountain of data.
I'm excited to be here.
Now, one number in this report really caught my eye. Europe's tech ecosystem is now worth over $3 trillion. That's 5 times what it was just a decade ago.
Wow.
Yeah, it's huge. But it also makes you wonder, is this a sign of strength or are we looking at a bubble that's about to burst?
It's definitely a remarkable number, and it really shows how much European tech has grown in such a short time. But like with any kind of rapid growth, you have to look deeper. You have to understand what's driving it. That's where this report gets really interesting.
Okay, so let's do that. Let's unpack it. The report talks about this massive surge in venture capital, $426 billion invested since 2015. That's 10 times what it was in the decade before. That's a pretty solid foundation, right?
It does seem that way. On the surface, it looks like there's plenty of fuel for this growth to keep going. But the report actually points out a big concern. They call it a growth funding gap of $375 billion. So while there's money coming in at the early stages, it seems like it's getting harder for European startups to get the funding they need to really scale up and compete at a global level.
So it's like they're hitting a wall just when they need the most support. Is this just about the amount of money available, or are there other things going on here?
It's definitely more complicated than just a lack of money. One key factor the report points to is that European pension funds, even though they manage trillions of euros, they're only investing a tiny fraction of that, like 0.01% into European venture capital. It's a huge missed opportunity.
That's crazy. Just imagine the impact if even a small percentage of those pension funds were invested in these promising European startups.
Exactly. And it's not just pension funds. The report also highlights the way capital markets are structured in Europe. Things like fragmentation and a lack of those big-time public equity investors that you see a lot of in the U.S.
So basically, the way the financial system is set up in Europe makes it harder for companies to attract those huge investments they need to become major players.
Exactly. And when you connect this to the bigger picture, this funding gap could have serious consequences for Europe's ability to compete with other global tech hubs like the US and China.
That's a scary thought.
Yeah.
So funding is clearly a major hurdle. What other challenges does the report point out?
Another big one is liquidity. Basically, how easily investors can get their money back when they need it. We see a lot of promising European tech companies going public, but they're often doing it on US exchanges instead of European ones.
Like ARM, right?
Sure.
Their decision to list in New York instead of London. That made headlines and really brought this issue to light.
Exactly. ARM's case is a perfect example of the pull of the US market. You've got a more flexible regulatory environment, a bigger pool of investors who are eager to invest in tech stocks, and more robust analyst coverage.
And I'm guessing it's not just about prestige. This trend of listing in the US has to be taking talent and money away from Europe, right?
Absolutely. It's a brain drain and a financial drain all in one. And it makes it even tougher to build a self-sustaining tech sector in Europe.
So we've got funding and liquidity as 2 major challenges. Anything else that keeps coming up in the report?
Well, you can't forget that Europe, even though it's united in many ways, is still a collection of individual countries. And this fragmentation of the European market creates its own set of challenges.
So imagine you're a startup. You've done really well in your home country and you're ready to expand across Europe. Suddenly you're dealing with 27 different sets of regulations and a patchwork of customer bases with different languages and cultural preferences.
Exactly. It's a far cry from the relatively unified market that companies enjoy in the US or even China. This makes it much harder for European startups to achieve that rapid hockey stick growth they need to compete globally.
It sounds like a logistical nightmare. So it's not just individual companies struggling. It's a bigger systemic issue within Europe itself.
You got it. The report stresses this point over and over. A lot of the hurdles facing European tech aren't about a lack of talent or ambition. It's these inherent complexities of navigating a fragmented market.
Speaking of navigating complexities, the report also gets into the regulatory landscape, right? That's always a hot topic in the tech world.
It is, and the report shows a mixed bag of opinions on how EU legislation is impacting entrepreneurship. Some laws like the Payment Services Directive or PSD2 are generally seen as positive.
So for those of us who don't speak fluent regulation, what does PSD2 actually do? And why is it seen as a good thing?
Well, PSD2 is all about creating a more integrated and secure electronic payments market across Europe. It's laying the groundwork for things like easier cross-border payments and a more level playing field for new fintech players.
Okay, so that sounds like a win for innovation. But I know some EU regulations have been criticized for being overly bureaucratic. Is that something the report addresses?
It definitely does. While PSD2 is a good example of regulation that's seen as helpful, the report also highlights concerns about things like GDPR and the EU AI Act.
I can see why GDPR, for example, while it's meant to protect data privacy, has been a headache for a lot of companies, especially smaller ones, who struggle to comply with all the rules.
Exactly, and the EU AI Act, while it aims to regulate the use of artificial intelligence, has raised concerns about potentially stifling innovation.
So it's a tough balancing act, trying to foster innovation while also making sure these powerful technologies are developed responsibly.
Absolutely. And finding that sweet spot is going to be crucial for Europe's tech future. The report found that almost half of the people they surveyed, founders, investors, talent, all see regulation and policymaking as major obstacles to European tech reaching its full potential.
Wow, that's a pretty damning statistic.
Yeah,
Almost 1 in 2 people see regulation as a problem. That's significant.
it really is. And it underscores the need for a more agile and responsive approach to regulation, one that can keep up with the speed at which technology changes.
But it's not all doom and gloom, right?
Hmm.
The report does highlight some success stories. Companies that have managed to overcome these hurdles and become global players.
Of course. You've got companies like Spotify and Revolut, which are perfect examples of European companies that have become household names around the world.
Those are definitely inspiring examples. And the report mentions others like Grammarly from Ukraine, Dynatrace from Austria, and Bolt from Estonia. It really shows that even with these challenges, innovation is happening all across Europe.
Absolutely. These success stories prove that it's possible for European companies to succeed globally. And they offer valuable lessons for other companies trying to follow in their footsteps.
But even with these successes, the report emphasizes the need to address that growth funding gap, right? Especially if Europe wants to create more of these tech giants.
Exactly. It's about creating a level playing field, so promising European startups have the same opportunities to scale and grow as their counterparts in Silicon Valley or other major tech hubs.
So let's get into the details of this funding gap. The report breaks it down, right? What are some of the key things we need to know?
One really interesting finding is that while European startups seem to do okay in the early stages, raising similar amounts of seed funding as US startups, the gap widens dramatically when it comes to those larger growth stage investments.
So they can get off the ground, but they're struggling to gain traction and really take off.
Precisely. The proportion of US companies raising $15 million or more is double that of European companies. That really shows the challenges European startups face once they move beyond that initial stage of funding.
So it seems like Europe has a ton of potential, but it's struggling to turn that potential into truly global tech giants.
That's a great way to put it. There's so much energy and innovation in the European tech ecosystem, but it needs the right support and infrastructure to really flourish on the global stage.
And that brings us to the investor landscape. What does the report say about the role of investors in all of this?
The report points out some interesting trends in the investor landscape. For example, the number of investors participating in European venture rounds has more than doubled since 2015.
So on the surface, that sounds like a good thing. More investors should mean more opportunities for startups to get funding.
Right, it seems that way. And it does point to a growing global interest in European tech. But there's a catch. Europe still relies heavily on U.S. investors for those crucial later-stage growth investments.
So even though there are more investors overall, Europe is still dependent on outside sources for the capital. It needs to really scale up.
Exactly. It highlights the need to cultivate a stronger base of domestic investors, investors who are willing to make bigger bets on European startups.
What about government funding? Does the report talk about that?
It does. The report acknowledges the important role government funding plays in supporting early-stage companies and venture capital funds.
So governments are providing that initial boost, but it's not enough to close the gap entirely.
That's right. And there's a strong argument for diversifying funding sources. So you're not overly reliant on any single type of investor, whether it's government or private entities.
Makes sense. A healthy ecosystem needs a balance of different funding sources to thrive.
Exactly. It's about building a robust and resilient funding landscape, one that can support the long-term growth of European tech. You know, it's interesting because even with all the challenges we talked about, the report is actually quite optimistic about the future of European tech.
Really? Even with that funding gap and the regulatory hurdles and all that, color me intrigued. What are they basing that optimism on?
Well, they project that Europe's tech ecosystem Could be worth over $8 trillion in 10 years, with a compound annual growth rate of 10%.
Wow, 8 trillion. That's massive.
Yeah.
So it's not just about staying afloat. They're talking about potentially dominating. What's driving that projection? Is it just blind faith? Or are there concrete things that make them think that's possible?
It's definitely not just blind faith. The report highlights a few key things. First, there's the continued growth of Europe's tech talent pool. They're predicting it to grow by another 15 million jobs, matching the U.S. in size in just 5 years.
So more talent means more people coming up with new ideas, building companies, driving growth, right?
Yeah.
But is it the right kind of talent? We talked about the brain drain earlier. With companies listing in the U.S.,
That's a great point. And the report acknowledges that attracting and keeping top global talent is crucial, but it also points out that Europe has some of the best universities and research institutions in the world. They're producing a constant stream of highly skilled tech professionals, so there's a solid foundation to build on.
okay, so talent is one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
What else is contributing to this positive outlook?
Another big factor is the increasing maturity of the European tech ecosystem. We're seeing more experienced founders, investors, support networks is becoming more self-sustaining, with successful founders reinvesting their money and expertise back into the next generation of startups.
So it's a snowball effect.
Yeah,
Success breeds more success.
exactly. And that's key for long-term growth and resilience. It means the ecosystem is less dependent on outside factors and can handle the ups and downs that come with any industry.
But for all this growth to actually happen, the report stresses the need to address those big challenges we talked about earlier, right? Those elephants in the room. Funding, liquidity, market fragmentation.
Absolutely. Closing the growth funding gap is the top priority. The report argues that getting access to capital at scale is essential if European companies want to compete globally. Without it, they're always going to be playing catch-up.
So what's the solution? How do they propose tackling this funding gap? What are some concrete ideas?
One key strategy is getting more capital from European pension funds. Remember that statistic we talked about earlier? Pension funds only investing 0.01% of their assets into European venture capital. The potential there is huge.
It really is. It makes you wonder what would happen if those funds were just a little bit more adventurous with their investments. But what about beyond pension funds? Are there other ways to attract more investment?
Creating a more attractive environment for IPOs is another big one. If Europe can compete with the US when it comes to those big tech listings, it'll keep more capital in Europe and boost its reputation as a global tech hub.
And that ties back into the liquidity issue we talked about.
Yeah.
More IPO options mean more exits for investors, which then attracts even more investment. It's a positive cycle.
Exactly. It's all about creating that feedback loop that drives sustained growth.
So funding is one piece. What are those other challenges, like the fragmentation of the European market and the regulatory environment? Does the report have any solutions for those?
It does. It emphasizes the need for a more unified approach to regulation and market integration across Europe. Basically, that means streamlining regulations across different countries, harmonizing standards, and making it easier for companies to operate across borders.
So making Europe less like a patchwork of 27 different countries and more like a single unified market. I imagine that's easier said than done.
It definitely won't be easy. It takes a lot of political will and coordination between countries, but the report argues that it's absolutely crucial if Europe wants to unlock the full potential of its tech sector.
And what about talent? We talked about how important it is to attract and keep top talent. How does the report suggest Europe can compete in the global talent war?
It comes down to creating a more attractive environment for skilled professionals. And that means more than just competitive salaries. It's about streamlining immigration, making it easier for people to move and work across borders, and building a vibrant, inclusive work culture where people feel valued and supported.
So it's the whole package, not just the paycheck. Creating a place where talented people from all over the world want to live and work, not just for a few years, but for the long haul.
Exactly. It's about building a truly global talent hub that can compete with places like Silicon Valley.
We've talked a lot about challenges, but the report also highlights some areas where Europe actually has an advantage, right?
Absolutely. One notable area is sustainability. European startups are leading the way when it comes to developing innovative solutions for a more sustainable future.
The report mentioned that $1 in $5 invested in European tech is going to companies working on sustainability challenges. That's more than double the proportion in the U.S.
Exactly. It really shows Europe's commitment to building a tech sector that's not just about profits, but about making a positive impact on the world.
And it makes sense, given Europe's strong policy focus on sustainability and climate change. It's a supportive environment for companies working in that space.
You've got it. You've got government support, consumer demand for sustainable products and services, and talented entrepreneurs who are passionate about making a difference. It's a recipe for success.
Beyond sustainability, what other strengths does the report highlight?
Another area where Europe's excelling is deep tech. The continent has a strong research base, especially in fields like artificial intelligence, robotics, and quantum computing.
Those are areas that take a lot of investment up front and a long-term vision. But they also have the potential to create groundbreaking technologies that could transform industries and solve some of the world's biggest problems.
Exactly. And Europe's history of scientific research gives them a head start in this area. They also have a good track record of collaboration between universities, research institutions, and companies, which is essential for deep tech to thrive.
The report mentioned that European investors are increasingly interested in deep tech investments.
That's right. A majority of the investors surveyed said they were actively looking at deep tech opportunities. This suggests we could see a lot more capital flowing into this sector in the next few years.
So Europe's well-positioned to be a leader in deep tech. But it all comes back to those fundamental challenges we talked about: funding, liquidity, market integration. Those things will all play a role in whether Europe can actually become a leader in this space.
Absolutely. Deep tech, by its very nature, needs patient investors and a supportive environment. It's not about quick wins. It's about building companies that can have a lasting impact.
So it's not enough to have great ideas.
Yeah.
You need the infrastructure and resources to actually turn those ideas into something real. Speaking of turning ideas into reality, the report ends with a call to action, right? What are the key takeaways for policymakers, investors, and founders?
The report urges everyone to focus on closing that growth funding gap, creating a more unified approach to regulation and market integration, and attracting and retaining global talent. Those are the three pillars that will determine the future of European tech.
It sounds like a tall order. But the report also seems optimistic that these challenges can be overcome.
Yes, the overall tone is definitely optimistic. It acknowledges the hurdles, but it emphasizes Europe's strengths and its potential to become a global tech leader if it addresses these challenges.
It's interesting how the report brings together these seemingly contradictory ideas. On the one hand, you have all this incredible growth and potential, and on the other, you have these deep-rooted challenges that need to be fixed.
It's a complicated story, but in the end, it's a story of opportunity. Europe has everything it needs to succeed, but it needs to act decisively and work together to reach its full potential.
And that leads us to an important question. What does all this mean for the average person? Why should they care about the state of European tech? It's easy to get lost in the numbers and forget about the real-world impact.
That's a great point. The impact of European tech goes way beyond startups and venture capitalists. It affects all of our lives in ways we might not even realize.
Okay, I'm all ears. Why should I, as an average person, care about whether Europe's tech sector succeeds or not?
Well, for one thing, a thriving tech sector creates jobs and boosts economic growth. It drives innovation, improves productivity, and ultimately makes our lives better.
So it's not just abstract concepts like innovation and growth. It's about real benefits for people and society.
Exactly. Think about the impact companies like Spotify, Revolut, or Bolt have had on your own life. They've changed how we listen to music, manage our money, and get around. And those are just a few examples. The ripple effects of a strong tech sector touch almost every part of our lives.
And those effects are only going to get stronger as technology becomes even more integrated into our lives.
Cool.
So you're saying the success of European tech isn't just about creating billionaires and giant companies. It's about making life better for everyone.
Precisely. And beyond those direct benefits, a strong European tech sector could shape the global tech landscape in a positive way.
What do you mean by that?
Europe has a unique opportunity to lead the way in developing a more ethical and responsible approach to technology.
It goes back to that commitment to sustainability and social impact that we talked about earlier. Is Europe really in a position to be a leader in ethical tech? Some would say they're already falling behind in areas like AI.
That's true. And there are definitely areas where Europe needs to catch up, but they also have a strong foundation to work with. Their regulations, while sometimes criticized for being complicated, are often focused on protecting consumers and promoting fairness.
So it's about finding the right balance between encouraging innovation and making sure technology is used for good.
Exactly. And that's where Europe can really stand out. They can be a model for a tech sector that balances business goals with a commitment to solving social problems.
So it's about building a tech sector that not only helps people and businesses, but also creates a more equitable and sustainable world. That's a vision I can get behind.
Absolutely. And that's why the state of European tech is so important. It's not just about making money. It's about shaping the future of technology so that it benefits all of us.
That's a powerful message. So what's the report's takeaway for people who want to be a part of this vision of a thriving and responsible European tech sector?
It calls for a collective effort. It urges policymakers, investors, and founders to work together to overcome the challenges and seize the opportunities that are out there. It's a call to action for anyone who believes in the power of technology to make the world a better place.
It sounds like a call to action, not just for those directly involved in tech, but for all of us who will benefit from its success.
Yep.
We're all consumers of technology, and the choices we make can have a real impact on where the industry goes.
Definitely. The future of European tech is a shared responsibility, and its success depends on the engagement and support of the entire European community.
That's a perfect transition to our next segment, where we'll be looking at the report's deep dive into specific themes and sectors that are driving innovation in European tech. We'll be getting into the details of what's happening on the ground and looking at the companies and trends that are shaping the future.
I'm looking forward to getting into those specifics.
Me too. It's time to go even deeper into this fascinating world. Okay, so we've talked about the big picture of European tech, the challenges, the opportunities, the potential impact on all of our lives. But now I want to zoom in a bit and see what's happening on the ground. The report goes into detail about specific sectors and themes, right? What really stands out?
Well, one thing you can't ignore is the rise of artificial intelligence, AI. It's everywhere these days. But what's happening in Europe specifically?
Yeah, it feels like AI is changing everything. Is Europe even in the game, given how much we hear about the US and China dominating the field?
That's a great question. And the report paints a pretty interesting picture. While investment in European AI is still behind the US, it's growing much faster. It went from a little over $1 billion in 2015 to almost $11 billion in 2024. That's almost a tenfold increase.
Wow, 10 times. That's huge. So they're catching up, but it's still have a long way to go.
Yeah. The US invested $47 billion in AI in 2024 alone. But the important thing is that Europe is gaining momentum. And they're not just throwing money at it. They have some really impressive AI companies that are making a global impact.
Okay, examples, please. What are these companies doing that's so groundbreaking?
Well, one example is Wave. They're a UK company developing self-driving technology. They're going up against Google's Waymo, which is seen as the leader. It's a classic underdog story. It shows that European companies aren't afraid to challenge the big guys.
I love a good underdog story. Are there other examples of European AI companies making an impact globally?
Oh, tons. DeepHello, a German company, has developed incredibly advanced translation technology. It's really giving Google Translate a run for its money. Then you have Photoroom, a French company. Their AI image editing tools are super popular with professionals and everyday users.
So this isn't just hype. European AI is producing real results that are changing how we live and work.
Exactly. And the report says that Europe has a unique chance to shape the future of AI in a way that fits with its values.
You mean the we talked about earlier, like sustainability, ethical tech, and that focus on social impact? How does that actually work with AI development? I always thought AI was just about algorithms and data.
It's true that AI is based on algorithms and data, but it's also about how those algorithms are designed and how that data is used. The report found that European AI startups are twice as likely to focus on solving social problems compared to their US counterparts. It suggests they're putting more effort into developing AI that benefits everyone, not just companies or governments.
So it's about creating a more human-centered approach to AI, one that aligns with European values and priorities.
Precisely. And that's where Europe could really take the lead, setting a new standard for ethical and responsible AI development.
This is all really interesting, but AI isn't the only thing happening. What other themes does the report highlight that are attracting investors and driving innovation in Europe?
Right. AI is just one part of the story. The report also goes into other exciting areas like carbon management and blockchain.
Carbon management makes sense, given Europe's focus on sustainability. But blockchain, I thought that hype died down after the whole crypto thing calmed down.
It did calm down, but blockchain is actually making a comeback, and a big one. The report says this is because of a few things, including some positive regulatory changes that have made it easier for companies to work in this space. And there's also renewed interest from major players like Stripe. They recently announced a new set of blockchain payment tools.
So blockchain went through its Wild West phase. Now it's maturing and finding its place in some interesting ways. What's exciting about blockchain in Europe right now?
One area that's creating a lot of buzz is decentralized finance, DeFi. It's about using blockchain to build a more open and transparent financial system,
Oh.
one that's not so reliant on traditional banks.
I can see why that would be appealing in Europe, given their history of challenging big institutions and pushing for more transparency.
Exactly. DeFi could empower individuals and small businesses, giving them more control over their finances
Yeah.
and access to more financial services.
So we have AI, carbon management, blockchain. Are there other sectors or trends that are shaping the future of European tech?
The report covers a wide range of sectors, from finance and healthcare to deep tech and gaming. It really shows the diversity and energy of the European tech scene.
It's amazing to see this ecosystem keep growing and maturing, producing all these innovative companies in so many different areas.
It really is. And it all points to a bright future for European tech. The report ends with a bold prediction. It says that Europe will have its first trillion-dollar company within 10 years.
A trillion-dollar company. That's a huge statement. So after all the challenges we've discussed, the report ends on a positive note.
It does. It acknowledges the hurdles. But ultimately, it's a story of opportunity. Europe has the talent, the ideas, the ambition to be a global leader.
It's a good reminder that even with all the complexities, Europe has a unique and important role to play in shaping the future of technology. And that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. It's not just about numbers and trends. It's about understanding the forces that are shaping our world and the potential for Europe to have a positive impact.
I agree. It's been great diving into this report with you.
Likewise. And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of the state of European tech. It's a story that's still unfolding, and we can't wait to see what happens next. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.